Hello, my name is Crystal Petry, and you are watching the third season of the Crystal Petry Podcast. Today is an exciting day for me. I have a Division One women's head soccer coach on here to talk about all things soccer. And if you have daughters who are interested in playing soccer at the collegiate level, then this podcast is for you. Welcome to the podcast, Nathan.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Absolutely. Okay, so Nathan, I totally should have asked you this question offline, but how do you pronounce your last name?
I was wondering when you were going to ask me that. Last name is Kogut.
Kogut. I completely had that wrong in my head.
I thought you were going to ask me pretty early, but it's
Yeah.
all right. And then I thought, oh, she's going to be brave with this.
No, no, I have been thinking about it. Like, how do you pronounce it? How do you pronounce it? And then I meant to ask you before we started recording. I was like, hey, we're just gonna do it. We're
I
just
love
gonna
it.
do it. Okay. So welcome to the podcast, Nathan Kogut. Thank you so much. You are the Lamar University women's head soccer coach. You're the first soccer coach I've had on here, which we discussed earlier. So no pressure to you at all. Where in the world are you, Nathan?
So I am in Beaumont, Texas. Lamar University is in Beaumont, which is southeast Texas. We're about 35 miles west of the Louisiana-Texas border. So we are in swamp and Cajun country over here.
Definitely, definitely all of that. So I feel like in 2025, coach, I shouldn't have to ask this question, but unfortunately, I still do have to ask this question.
Mhm.
What drew you to coaching women's sports, particularly women's soccer?
Soccer was something that's always been a part of my life. I grew it. I started playing when I was really young, and
Okay.
I'm ADHD, and it was a sport that never stops moving. So it was the one sport that I stuck with, and it was fun for me. And I
Mhm.
just happened to be pretty good at it, so I kept going. And then obviously it gave me some of my best friends, and um, pretty early on, my parents were open with it's going to be really tough to find a career in it
Okay.
and you need to find a different career path. And so I tried that. I tried the real world and looked around, and I realized that I just had a passion for teaching. I had a passion. Both of my parents were in higher education. I did not follow in that path in terms of getting good grades, but it was just being able to teach and coach and help people learn really stuck with me. I started out actually coaching both men and women, boys and girls. Part of it, and this is just the way the world works, is that there's so many more women's programs than there are men's programs around the country, just
I'm
because
shocked by that. I did not
there's
think that.
there's twice as many in the Division 1 level. And I didn't get into this trying to be a Division 1 coach. I just wanted to be able to be a college soccer coach when I started. So actually my first full-time job was on the men's side at the D3 level. Um, but the more that I've coached on the men's side, I've enjoyed the interactions with them. I've
Mhm.
hated actually teaching and coaching soccer. I didn't feel like I was making an impact. I thought that the game was a little bit too physical for me. The egos were a bit too much. I just didn't enjoy the interactions. They really didn't care if you cared. It was just you were there and you were the next person to speak.
Mhm.
So when I got my first full-time women's job, I was just really hooked with college was my favorite time of my life. I can take a young woman and we see them grow from this 15, 16-year-old girl into a young adult, and I felt more impactful on the women's side because it's so relationship based, because they want to know how much you know and how much you care. It just felt like I was actually involved in having a meaningful part. And I've been doing this for close to 15 years at the college level. I haven't been invited to a single one of my former male players' weddings. I don't get birthday announcement. I don't get any of that. And I think it's not that I was bad at it. It's tough to make that impact all the time. Whereas on the women's side, I mean, we've got our fridge is full of former players sending us stuff, regardless of where I've been. It's I just feel more impactful, I guess, is a long rambling way to say it.
Oh my goodness. You know what? I read something online, coach, that said you can tell your impact as a coach by how many wedding invitations you get.
Mm-hmm. We received one the other day from a player who was drafted in the first round of the professional league in the United States 6 years ago now. So I haven't coached her since December of 2019, and we've seen each other 4 times at other people's weddings since then. And she's still playing professionally. She won a world championship last year, and we got her wedding invite the other day, and it was just it's something about that. You go somewhere and it's special. There's something about it.
Coach, tell us the difference. And I don't know if you want to talk about it on the competitive level or maybe the numbers. What is the difference between a Division 1 or D1 college compared to others?
It's going to be resources and it's going to be time commitment. I mean, at the D2 and D3 level, the sometimes the level is going to be lower. We have to acknowledge that. With some new things coming on, a lot of the Division 1 kids will trickle down and make those 2 divisions better or the NAIA better. But the biggest thing is going to be the resources allocated, and it's going to be the standard and time commitment. I mean, our student athletes are for 8 or 9 months a year, they're around us. So we have to be very intentional about when we can give them time off and let them be normal human beings versus when we have to start demanding a lot out of them. At the D2 level, it's a little similar, but we start later, so stuff gets compact, and then you have a little less time with them in the spring. And I've always said that at the D3 level, when it's done at the D1 level, you can do it. It's got to be done really, really well, but it's tough. But at the D3 level, that's a true student athlete experience. You start later, you finish earlier, but then you don't get to see your student athletes in a serious environment for a large chunk of the spring because they do other things. So that to me is the biggest difference between that D1, D2, and D3. In addition to obviously you're going to have, for the most part, you're going to have better soccer players, but with a lot of the legislation getting passed, those players are dropping in and doing really well at other divisions as well.
What is something about women's soccer at the Division 1 level that the average fan might not realize?
Oh my gosh, the time commitment of these young women is so high. Our kids move back June 30th, and we personally don't see them as coaches until July 31st, and then we don't step aside out of their day-to-day lives until just like the week before Thanksgiving. And so you're looking at 4.5 months of like that. You spend more time with them than you do your family, and then you give them about 6 weeks off, and then you're right back into it again. So you spend an awful lot of time with these young people than most people think. And then the other thing that I will say is not everybody's driven by money. So that's been a common thing of, what happens when these student athletes get paid. They can transfer anytime they want to. They can do all that. How do you build your roster? If you treat them the right way and you make sure that you're invested in who they are big picture wise and you're helping them reach their goals, money is never brought up and they have zero reason to leave. So when people say, how do you deal with the transfer portal? We use it to enhance our roster. We don't really have kids. We've had one kid in 3 years that we were shocked entered the portal. Everything else has been either this is not working out for both of us, or we've used it the other way and we brought him in. I mean, I think those are some common Division 1 misconceptions.
Coach, talk to me about this culture that you are building at Lamar University, located in Beaumont, Texas, with the women's soccer club, where you get your players and they don't leave. You get your players and they invite you to their weddings.
Culture is how you act, you interact, and you react. And we take that part really serious. there are a lot of players that we talk to that ask us about culture. And I always say, have you ever spoken to somebody that says their culture is bad?
Exactly.
And no one's going to tell you yes. I'll probably be the first person to tell you that it's something that we work and we fail and we succeed at every single day. I won't pretend that we're perfect. It's something that we are really intentional about. I could sit here and say that our fall season was not as successful as our first 2 years directly because of the way our kids acted, interacted, and reacted with each other.
Are
And
you talking
so,
about fall 2024?
yes, ma'am. Yeah,
Okay.
we were predicted to win the league, and we finished seventh. And that, to me, shows that it wasn't a talent issue. We were a
Hmm.
talented team. The way we interacted with each other and the way we did our kids went about their day-to-day life was not at a championship level. And we've spent all spring reintegrating all of our values and our standards back into the program, basically like it was ground zero, and we're rebuilding. And I'm really excited about what we've done. Our first 2 years, we had a lot of pros, we had a lot of old kids
Hmm.
that helped drive our culture, and they helped drive this. It basically got to the point where if somebody did something wrong, a player would step up and say, that's not how we do things here. And in the fall, it was a lot more coaches having to run that because we were a little bit more immature. So, but I will say that it is something that I work on and our staff works on and our team works on every single day. We are open, we share, um, we do a lot of public speaking. Our kids have to be vulnerable with each other. They have to be empathetic. Um, they have to learn how to talk to each other. And then the other one that it's a buzzword these days, when you talk about family, there are a
Hmm.
lot of people and organizations that talk about how they're a family.
Right.
I hate that statement because they almost always use it in terms of, man, we're like this. We love each other. Love is that value you're talking about. You're not talking about family, because my family, there's tension. My sister and I drive each other nuts. At the end of the day, we know that we have each other's backs
Right.
through shared experiences and stuff that we've lived through, and we've built that relationship.
Hmm.
But that doesn't mean that we don't, like, oh my God, please shut up. And so we do, like, the 30th kid on our roster and our first kid on the roster, they might drive each other nuts, but at some point they also know that we have each other's backs. And so that's the family that we preach, not this everything is rainbows and butterflies. So when people talk about join our family, I'm like, are you really wanting the full family experience? Because families are tough, but they
Families are tough.
but they have each other's backs and they move that way. And that's what we mean when we talk about that.
What is one of the or some of the biggest challenges you see, coach, facing Division I women's soccer?
The big one right now is roster limits and the settlement that the NCAA and the judges are working to approve. Um, I think I don't love it. I
What
don't
are the
love.
roster
So
limits?
right now, the long story is that, or the short version of the long story is that a judge is working to approve revenue sharing for student athletes. In order to approve revenue sharing, they've taken away scholarship caps. Women's soccer has always been at 14, and you
Mhm.
could carry as large a roster as you wanted to with 14 scholarships. Now they are eliminating the 14 scholarships and making it a sport where you can only go up to 28 players, and
Mhm.
you can scholarship 28 full rides if a school wanted to. So some schools are going to do that settlement like we are, but we're not increasing the scholarships. We're bringing the roster limit to 28.
And you're
Um,
still going to do the 14 scholarships.
and so there's a lot of schools that are in similar boats to us. There's a lot of big schools that are going to, bump up a lot more money. That's a massive difference. I mean, there are schools that have entered a lot of kids into the portal in the last 3 days that are going to increase their scholarship limit, and we are competing with them. But the other side of that, as someone who I believe in opportunity,
Hmm.
I don't believe in this time of their lives I should be cutting people because of a settlement that a judge and attorneys didn't bring coaches in to talk about. So like I said earlier, this is the best time of their lives. This is the formative time of their lives. They are at Lamar to because it meant something. Very few of our kids are at Lamar because of money. They're here because of what we can provide. And you're telling me that at some point, if I have 32 on the roster, that you may ask me to let 4 of them go because of a settlement 2,000 miles away. That's massive. The transfer portal isn't changing things. Like, as many people want to complain about it, obviously I'm spoiled because we use it, but it runs both ways. If you don't want to lose kids, you treat them well. That's not a big deal. Giving them money, that's not a big deal because so many people give stipends that go into their pockets anyways. That's not
Right.
in the sport. The biggest thing I think for me is how do we maintain who we are? We're dealing with young women that aren't going pro, and we're taking that away.
Wow. When is that judgment coming down? Do you know?
April 7th was the first serious court date where they
Mhm.
were trying to approve the settlement. There's been a lot of schools that have worked with the preliminary approval, and the judge last week said, I'm not approving this until you figure out a way to grandfather rosters in. And so I don't know. She has made it very clear that she wants to approve the settlement. There are a lot of schools that have made moves anticipating the settlement. Lamar has been one of those where we've sort of put one foot on each pathway, and
Okay.
we've been ready to pivot. As soon as she passed that piece, and as soon as she announced that piece, we didn't let kids go. Like, we kept our kids because I believe in her that she's going to let us grandfather them in and allow us to maintain our roster as is. But to me, the portal is what it is, money is what it is,
Mhm.
club soccer is what it is. To me, that's a scary piece of soccer. Is so many schools are going to start dropping kids. What is that what we signed up for?
And what do they do? I mean, you just bring them into the office and say, we can no longer use your services and goodbye. What happens to the kid after that?
So, and well, the fun part is the NCAA actually said you couldn't use the roster limit as a reason to let kids go. So,
No.
so while we're trying to hit a moving target that we can't see, they're also tying our hands behind our backs because they're demanding that we get to this level. And then you can't actually use that as justification for what we're being asked to do. So what it's done is it's forced you to become like an HR representative. You've got to document everything. And then at some point you're going to bring in a kid and say, hey, oh yeah, by the way, remember this thing you did in March? Well, that's the last straw that we haven't talked about in 3 months. It makes it hard for you to do your job. So what we ended up doing was we held off on all of our meetings for as long as we could. We wanted to see what the judge was going to say, what Lamar was going to ask us to do. And then we had honest conversations of, look, if the judge does this, this is what's going to happen. But I have some faith that it's not. You just need to know where you stand. And it allowed them to make their decisions based off of that.
I feel like, and of course, I don't know the whole process. I haven't read all the documentation, but I feel like they're throwing the rock and hiding their hands.
They are. It was incredible. The transfer portal is not popping right now as much as it was in December, but there
Mhm.
were schools that were cutting. There's been schools that cut double-digit kids this time, but there were a lot more schools that had 8 to 12 kids enter, and it was because they had 34 on the roster. They dropped down into the 20s, and then they wanted to still pick up portal kids in both windows. What we've started to see now is that you have kids in the portal that were in the portal in December and made a different choice, and now they're in it again. Or you have early enrollees in the portal. So kids that graduated in December from high school and enrolled at their dream school as a 17-year-old freshman that should
Yes.
be a second semester high school senior, they're in the portal. And so you're just seeing all of these things, and there's just not enough guidance. But I don't. I guess where I sit on this is we've had to let some kids go
Hmm.
because it wasn't a fit. I won't act like we're perfect, but it nothing to do with soccer. It was you're not a fit for what we're building. But I get sick to my stomach. I lost almost 10 pounds in the last 10 days because I stress about
Wow.
this. I stress about this stuff. This is not just my job. I'm impacting somebody's life.
Yes.
And I couldn't imagine some of the conversations I feel people have. It just feels so callous, or it is perceived as so callous. If I let somebody go, they get every chance to earn that good or bad. And I don't know if some coaches believe the same, and I'm not going to act like I'm a saint, but it does hurt me.
I am glad that as a coach, you see more than just numbers, because that's what it boils down to. You see human beings that are directed by every decision that you make.
Mm-hmm. I take that. This is a calling for me. This is not just my job. This is a calling for me. I feel guided to this profession, and um, I take when somebody commits to me and I offer somebody, that's a contract, and I take that part very serious. This is my job is in 4, 5, 6 years. As long as they're here, I get them to where they want to go, and I get them that sheet of paper. And if we do things right, they get 2 sheets of paper because they get that master's as well. And Lamar gets some credit with that, but that's the big piece. Soccer is just the vehicle that they use to change their life.
Coach, how do you, or maybe what tools do you use to help your students, to help your players balance academic and athletic? Because I know you said that the time commitment is massive. How do
Mhm.
you help them balance the two?
Academics is actually one of the few duties on staff that I don't delegate and I don't share. Like academics is the one is my baby. And I think it goes back to mistakes that I made growing up that my
Hmm.
parents could have very easily said, I told you so, and they chose not to, thankfully. But that I think that's where it comes down to. I do 4 to 6 progress reports every semester. I try to eliminate surprises before they can happen. Our student athletes are asked to sit in the first 2 rows or right down the middle so that professors can see them. They're asked to introduce themselves to professors as a Lamar soccer player so that professors know who they are. To me, I have found that that's the biggest difference between an 89 and a 90
It's
is
true.
is is that they know who those people are, or God forbid a 79 and an 80 or even lower than that. Like that changes some stuff because you're not just a name on an email signature. Um, we do a lot of work with how do our kids type an email? How do they shake somebody's hand? How do they make eye contact? What does small talk look like? So I take the career part really serious. I don't, when someone tells me that they want to be a pro, the conversation we have with them is you've got to be a pro before you're an actual pro. And if you're not doing that, then you also have to make sure you get that sheet of paper. Um, Everybody's got study hall. Our lowest kid with study hall has 4 or 5 hours. Our highest kid is in the teens, high teens. If you don't take it serious, your part-time job is soccer and your other part-time job is school. Um,
Hmm.
and so we make it so that if you have 10 hours of study hall, you're only allowed to do it in 3 different places on campus. I can check every single time. It's listed in an app that we use for organization. If I need you for something or we got to come find you, we know where you are. But it's also meant to just be the bare minimum of a tool because you should be studying. If it's 10 hours, you should be studying close to 30. You should be trying to get ahead. And it's meant to give you tools. It's not meant to be your entire set of tools. So the other perk for us is that our sport administrator, the person who oversees us, runs all the academics for the athletic department, and so she also works to help us make sure our kids are well taken care of. They're in the right classes, not easy classes, but
Hmm.
they're in classes with professors that understand the time commitment or the demands. Professors that will allow them, if we're on a road trip, to proctor an exam from a hotel or take the test early instead of a professor that's going to give a 0 because they missed a Thursday test. And so she helps us with that. And you're nodding, but it happens. Like we do. There are professors at every school I've been at that don't care that we've got student
Wow,
athletes.
that is horrible.
It's something.
It's something. I'll say what you said. It's definitely something, coach.
Yep.
What is your philosophy for player development on and off the soccer field?
The question comes back to why. Everything we do has to be answered why. I've worked for people that hated to have student athletes ask them questions. And I think it comes from a place of insecurity and
Hmm.
being self-conscious. We do everything with behind why. So if we're doing something off the field, I have found that student athletes will be more bought in if they understand why we're doing it. One of our core values is legacy. So if we do community service, there's your core value, and there's your answer right there. That we get to act on that value. But sometimes young kids need you to explain why before they're completely bought in. So everything we do is under that lens, and we also have to understand that you know there was a time in 22 and 2023 here we had 17-year-olds and we had
Hmm.
25-year-olds. Those are on two different development pathways.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a baby and that's a grown woman, and that's a big deal. And so development happens at that rate. It's all individual based. We learn about how they best receive feedback, and we teach them how should they give feedback. We do a lot of public speaking, They have to share. Sometimes we'll do questions like, would you rather have a personal chef or a personal driver? And that's kind of a funny one.
Oh,
But then we'll
personal
also,
chef for me.
yeah, I like driving. So yeah, I want someone to do that. But then we followed up with give me 2 times in your life you told yourself you weren't good enough, and
Wow.
what drove that. And then as they start to think and listen, they start realizing that they were just comparing themselves to somebody else that they didn't have to. But we do that. Like we share, we make ourselves vulnerable. We have to listen. So that's a big one with this generation, is not only do they have to learn how to talk to each other, they have to learn how to listen. And
Mhm.
so we are, I mean, for 30 minutes a day we're in the locker room talking, and then for 90 minutes a day we're out on the field learning. So that does sound like it's a little bit imbalanced, but I've found that our kids treat training like it's recess, and so they're just chomping at the bit to put the boots on and go. So we have to find little pockets of space throughout the week to continue some of those, so it balances stuff out. But um, like I think I said earlier in my answers, the best part of this is college. You start talking to them when they're 16 and they leave when they're 22, 23, 24.
That's almost 10 years.
They're not, and with COVID and all the red shirts and stuff, sometimes you get that, but they're not the same kid they were when you got them there. And it's just, they're clay when they get here, and
Hmm.
you mold them to who they're going to be for the rest of their lives. That's a pretty cool responsibility.
Speaking of that, is that a heavy responsibility to carry? You have your mom and dad, they turn their daughter over to you for the next 5, 6, 7 years. Is that a huge responsibility for you?
It's not just it's not just a 4 or 5 year thing. These kids are mine for as long as I'm alive. They are always going to be mine. Um, Vic Schaefer is the head women's basketball coach at the University of Texas, and when they made the Final Four this year, one of the things that he said was he deferred to his wife and kids, and how
Mhm.
much they sacrifice for him to do what he does, and how much time he pours into those student athletes. It is a all involving job. I worry about these kids more than I worry about my family sometimes. Like my family, it takes a back seat to other people's kids a lot. It's not something I take lightly.
Mhm.
I love what I do. I'm very blessed and privileged to do what I do. I get paid to coach a sport, But there are times where you're like, you know what? I don't know if I want kids because I deal with somebody else's kids
Yeah.
every day. And
I hear a lot of teachers say that.
yeah, but at the end of the day, it's the accountability that I feel gets held by the scoreboard and whether I get these kids graduated, and then you see the wedding invitations on the fridge and stuff like that. But um, it's a job unlike any other in the world, and I wouldn't want to do anything else. So I do feel it. I feel it every day, but that's what gets me up in the morning.
What does success look like to you? I mean, obviously you're a D1, women's soccer coach, head soccer coach. So of course I would say winning the games, winning your conference.
Mhm.
That's what success feels like. But other than that, what does success feel like and look like for you?
That's a very good question because I would almost when you talk about wins, winning is hard. Like it is very hard. You don't just roll a ball out and do it. There's a lot that has to go into it. There's a lot of little details and there's a lot of luck. And so it's tough because administrators look at the scoreboard and that's your accountability. They look at the
Yes.
graduation rates and that's your accountability. And so success, I'm in a group chat right now with some of my former players and former boss, and I haven't coached those kids in 6 years. That's success. That I still, my wife, they still ask about, our family, and they still ask about my parents. Success is when you get invited to that wedding and they've got 5 bridesmaids, 3 of them are kids they played college soccer with.
Oh,
That's easy. I mean, but it's not just the Division 1 thing. I think it's just the way I'm wired. I received a request for my address because a kid I coached playing club soccer 5 years ago when he was 12 is graduating in 2 weeks, and they want to send me a graduation
and
announcement.
they remembered you?
Well, but that's like, I mean, and for club, you're just developing. It's about how fun can you make it, and that's success. And it sounds cheesy, but I get goosebumps when I think about having that because there's not a lot of jobs where you directly impact somebody's life,
I agree.
which is a lot of responsibility, but that impact shows way more than wins and losses. And it's cool that those can be hand in hand, but I mean that I wake up every day very thankful that all of those kids are still going to be my kids, whether I coach them or not, and they look at it the same way.
Let's talk about something a little more difficult with soccer. I consider soccer, whether it's men or women, a collision sport.
Mm-hmm.
And with that collision, you get a lot of injuries because of the nature of the beast whenever you're playing soccer. Torn ACLs are very common in soccer. Torn ACLs are very common with women playing soccer. Why do you think that is? And of course, to my knowledge, you're not a medical doctor, but just would like your thoughts on that.
Well, the experts will tell you that it's a lot has to do with women's body shape and women's hip movement and the way that their bodies in general are shaped compared to men.
Mhm.
There's a study that U.S. Soccer just commissioned trying to study the effects of the menstrual cycle and ACL prevention and ACL tears. So there are a lot of factors that don't just have to do with fatigue and warm-ups and stuff like that. Just the overall female body shape puts a lot of stress and strain on their lower body. Their hips are a little more narrow than on the men's side,
Mhm.
which creates a lot more torque. I have also found that on the women's side, because of flexibility and their body type, they will play a lot more passes facing the wrong direction and it going across their body or that way um, than they do on the men's side. And I think it's just because they can torque that way. And it's very interesting. And eventually your body and the strain just snaps. But then you can really get into the fatigue, whether they understand what injury prevention looks like, the way they warm up, the way they recover. But a huge piece for me, the longer I've been involved with this, is that if you don't do the preventative steps, you're a ticking time bomb just because of the strain that a high level female performer is under just based off of body.
What are some of the preventative steps that you have incorporated in your soccer program?
So there's the soccer governing body put out something called FIFA 11. It's an ACL prevention program. You
Mm-hmm.
do it 2 or 3 times a week. We do it four times after training. And these are just little things that you start to point out knee and ankle stability, and you start to point out imbalances between the two legs. And it starts to incorporate exercises and movements that bring both legs closer together in terms of strength and flexibility and mobility. So we do a lot of that. We have GPS trackers that our players wear, so I can see player load and everything. They'll wear them in the weight room. They'll wear them in training. They wear them in games. Everything that they're active, we look at, and it'll pop up and populate enough data that we can see we probably need to give this kid a couple days off. We need to rotate her a little bit more. You're never going to be perfect, but you can get some tools that allow you to get ahead of it. And then I do know that some programs and that some clubs and some professional teams, they do track menstrual cycles, and they do.
What? Is that invasive?
No. So they don't do it as like they want to know your privacy. They do it
Mm-hmm.
so that because the body changes so much during that week and it's under so
Yes,
much stress, that they can tailor things to make sure their players are okay. So
that's smart.
we don't do that, but we have created an environment where our players are open with us about things they're feeling during that week. And
Mm-hmm.
then you can start to figure out, all right, well, this week we're definitely gonna have to go lighter on Tuesday or Wednesday because I've heard that this is going on, that they're cramping, they don't feel very well, they feel bloated. And we take all that info and we don't share it, but we start to realize that this is what week we're in, and this is how we tailor our stuff to it. So um yeah, there's a lot, just because they are young women, that you don't think about when you only are on the men's side. That's like, oh, that's actually a pretty cool idea, that maybe they aren't tied together, but the female body is undergoing something that week that could lead to injuries.
Mm-hmm.
The worst that can happen is we find out there's no correlation.
Right, right. Listen, before I get to my next question, Coach, at, as a former sports person, I just went through high school. I didn't do it in college.
Yeah.
Thank you. Because I'm telling you, in high school, during my generation, those coaches did not care if you on your menstrual cycle or not. They were still pushing you and yelling at you as if nothing was going on with your body. And
Yeah.
you're going through a huge, deal when you're on your cycle, but they did not care about at all. So thank you for the inclusiveness.
Of course.
Thank you for that. Okay, so whenever someone tears an ACL, yes, that's a physical thing, but I feel like it's more mental and emotional, because a torn ACL, you are out for the entire season, depending on when it happens, that season and the next season. That's a huge emotional and mental toll. How do you help your players through that?
They have to understand they're not alone. You
Mm-hmm.
know, almost every time that they're going through the MRIs and the surgery and the rehab, it's a very lonely process. You know, like they're not doing that with their teammates. Their teammates aren't watching the surgeon got that knee up. The teammates
Exactly.
aren't in the doctor's office. They're not in the rehab facility with them. It's very isolating. And it is I ask our athletic trainers every single day to share with me something about that rehab. Like, I need to know, and it is a little micromanaging. I want to know every little thing they did. I want to know, did they have a good day? They have a bad day. Did we hit a milestone? Or are we 3 weeks behind? I just want to know that when I go in there, that what I need to be celebrating. And the other thing is, what do I need to talk about? Because sometimes they don't want to, if it becomes your identity. You're the injured kid. So there are a lot of times in those moments that I just don't even talk to them about their knee. Like we just ignore that they have a lower body in general, and we just talk about everything else under the sun. But we make sure that when they are coming back, they are around us as much as possible. I try to travel everybody that I am allowed to travel, even if they're hurt, because it is a very isolating experience. So if I'm not allowed to travel somebody for whatever purpose, they know about it ahead of time. If they're doing everything right, we're going to make sure that they're like, maybe they're charting something in games and training so they feel super invested in what's happening. We figure out a way to give them a role that isn't just so-and-so the injured kid. And then the other thing is none of us got into coaching to be administrators. I hate paperwork. I hate sitting in the office. So if we get to a point where we're 4 months in and this kid's allowed to start jogging and touching a ball, oh my God, one of us is out there with them. And by the time we get to 8 months, they're incorporated back as soon as we can. We're doing extra work with them. By the time they're 12 months and the brace is off, it's like they haven't left. And so we try to treat, it's totally different, but the mental part of it is so massive. They just have to know that it's not 30 players and one ACL. It's 31 players all the time. And it gets tough. Like it's a lot of work to do, but that's the only way those kids are going to come back the way you want them to come back. And we work at that every day.
Let's talk a little bit, Coach, about club soccer. So club soccer is, I guess, anything under the collegiate level. Do you feel like club soccer is doing enough to help out the college coaches such as yourself?
Sometimes. I think that if you want to talk about club and the issues with club soccer, you'd have to go to the national body as well, because I call it alphabet soup. I'm going to list off acronyms of places and things that I've gone to recruit. I recruit at ECNL events. I recruit at GA events, DPL, FDL, USYS. All of a sudden, I've listed 5 or 6 things that are just acronyms. It's alphabet. And all of them have a different person in charge, and they don't work together. And they do a lot to incorporate stuff with college coaches, but they don't help each other. What's good for one, they hope it's bad for another. And so if you really want to drill down on that, the big organization for US soccer has to do a better job of filtering down on both the boys and the girls side to make those more unified. Because it's bad enough as a college coach. In 2023, I recruited, I can tell you the exact thing, December 4th through the 7th, if I'm remembering correctly, there was an event in California, just outside of Anaheim. There was an event in Nashville, Tennessee, and they were at the same exact time, and they were the final national event for both organizations for 2023. And I did both.
Really? How did you even make that happen?
I mean, I flew from Cali at 4 a.m. and I made it to Nashville, grabbed my car, and I was back at the fields at 2 o'clock that afternoon, and I was there for the rest of the week. But I only was able to make one day of the other event because the kids that you wanted to recruit and evaluate on the second day had a day off. And it almost felt like, because they had play, day off, 2 days in a row playing, where it almost felt like you had to pick and choose. You were going to stay at that event, you were going to go to the other one, because you could have gone 2 and 2. And they don't work together. That's the biggest thing. They don't work together, and they don't care if it helps them. Does it help somebody else? At the end of the day, there's very few people in those positions that are truly about the player.
Do you think that, and this is parents and coaches,
Mhm.
do you think that they invest and put too much into club soccer? Because you hear all the time parents fighting at these games, yelling at the refs, the coaches getting red carded and kicked out of the game. Like, are they just too invested in club soccer?
I think parents are too invested in their children's extracurriculars to
Okay.
where it becomes like a full-time job for them. When I always ask recruits, tell me about your families. I always bring families in. I'll take recruits off my board if I don't like the way they interact with their parents. But I also put a red flag up when parents run the show, because parents are the ones that, if something doesn't go their kid's way, that kid is scared to tell the truth. That kid may only tell bad stuff back home and not say how much fun they're having in every other aspect. And those people are going to show up at your office and they're going to call and they're going to be upset. And those are the parents that are over involved and almost like they're projecting into that child's childhood. The interesting thing about club from when I did it, and this was 25, 30 years ago, was um, there are a lot more full-time club coaches now than there ever were when I was coming up.
Really?
So there are a lot of coaches that it may be they're making $45,000 a year, but it is livable. But
Hmm.
they're taking 3 or 4 teams. But there are a lot more of those coaches involved in club soccer now than there were before. So these people are no longer doing it as a hobby; it's a job. And
Right.
now they're doing it to find the next job, or they're doing it to sell themselves to get more money. So it stopped being about the kid; it became their job. And so that's it. And that's I'm generalizing an entire
Right.
group
Absolutely.
off of some really bad apples. And I will
Hmm.
say that I've met a ton of really good parents that I don't let the bad apple ruin it. But those are a couple of things that I see in our process, because there are some fantastic coaches at the club level that do it full time just because that's what's best for their family. Or they're with all the changes in the way the NCAA is, there are a lot of college coaches that are getting out of the college game and into the club game because they can provide for their family. They're around more often and they're still around the game. So that, I think I'm generalizing on some of that as well, because they're good people on both sides.
What would you say if you can pick? And I'm assuming there's probably more than one thing on the club level that you wish your incoming collegiate players were better at, as far as skills, strength, things like that. That okay, I wish you worked on this more on the club level so you would have it by the time you got to me.
I wish they understood the game more tactically. I think that some of the best clubs in the country do a lot of work watching film. They do a lot of work on a whiteboard. They do a lot of answering questions, and they play different styles depending on the game. So, some of my favorite events to go recruit are events that have a trophy, or events that are in like playoff settings, championship, things like that. Because once you get to that point, it is college coaches be damned. We're going for a real prize, which means you start to get it a little more serious, like college and professional,
Hmm.
where you're going to do what you need to do to get a result. I don't care if I make anybody happy, and I don't care if it looks pretty. Whereas with showcases, you're trying to show off what you're about, and you're trying to show off the depth that you've got, and you're trying to make sure a college coach has that sheet of paper out and they're like, "Oh, okay, that kid's good." Whereas you get to a championship setting and you're used to playing a formation that just shows off everybody, and now you got to add an extra defender to the mix so someone comes off the field. Do they understand how to do that? And so what we have found is that our kids are not always the most tactically astute. They have to learn that. They have to learn about how to watch film, and they have to learn to ask those questions, and they have to learn how to defend. They have to learn how to make a run this way or things like that. I wish more club coaches taught a lot more, but that's time and place and team dependent, I guess.
Let's talk about the growth of women's soccer. It has definitely grown over the last 5, 6 years tremendously.
Mhm.
What do you think the next thing needs to happen to help the sport progress even further?
I think there's two things. One ties U.S. soccer in general, so the women are involved in it. I think that there has to be repercussions for results. What I mean by that is there are a lot of low-level owners that would love to get involved in the soccer ecosystem at the professional level, at the club level, but they get canceled out because there's a big city that has 8 clubs. That team can beat a lot of the top teams in that city, but they don't have access. So it has to be about access. And that's on the English Premier League is the biggest league in the world. And right now in May, there's 6 divisions underneath it chasing to get promoted to the next one. And there's 6 divisions that have teams at the bottom that are trying to keep themselves from getting knocked down to the next level. I think you have to have promotion and relegation in this country in general so that all those teams that are in Major League Soccer and all those teams that are in the NWSL, they're not just there because they were there to begin with or an owner paid $250 million
That
to
makes
get there.
sense.
So
Yes.
you have to have the ability for, if Beaumont had a soccer team and they were semi-pro and they climbed their way up, that team has access to get to the next thing, which is where they have all the finances, and then the next thing. So welcome to Wrexham with Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhaney.
Right.
They've been promoted since that show started 3 times in 3 consecutive years. That's never happened before because they have the opportunity and they have the right ownership. So I think that's the first part. I think on both sides, you have to have an open system that allows their results matter, but people have access.
Right.
And I think the other thing is that the investment in the women's game has climbed and it has to continue to climb. We need at the college level our version of Caitlin Clark. We
Oh,
need
yes.
we need that. But in order to do that, you need people that share those stories. You need access. You have to be inclusive. And right now, I could sit here and say at the college level, ESPN shares everything on ESPN3 or the SEC network or something like that. But they don't do 4 games a week on ESPN 1, 2, U, network, any of that stuff. They don't do that like they did for her or Juju Watkins, any of those people. And I don't begrudge them for looking at that. But there is a distinct reason that women's basketball has jumped through the stratosphere.
Absolutely.
Softball a few years ago did the same thing
Yes.
because they got access. And I think that there are a lot of stories to share. I think that there has to be we have stories, and I think that we have to be able to have that access. That's how you grow the women's game because there are a lot of women that, and there's a lot of investment in those young women or those women in general that it's pretty neat to see. But you can even tie those together that Denver paid 150 million or something like that for their club, to be in the NWSL. Why did they pay so much? Like, you're telling me that you couldn't form a handful to get in? And where does that money go? And then once they're there, what are the consequences for them not doing the right thing? Where does their trickle down? Because there's 5 amazing clubs that run right down that interstate in Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
Where do those clubs fall into play? Does that Denver team start their own? Where's the access? And I think that those are some things that we got to be able to share some stories, and it can't just be in Olympic years and World Cup years. It has to be all the time. That's how you get Caitlin Clark.
Speak a little bit more, Coach, about the necessity for media and television and how that really does help grow the game because it's always top of mind.
Mm-hmm. So when I was at the University of Alabama as a GA, one of my internships was with Alabama softball. Patrick Murphy is the head coach there, and he he joined the program in their first year, and he was head coach from their second year on. This is his 28th year, I think. Um, they played in a park in middle of Tuscaloosa, and this past weekend they had 3 straight sellouts of over 4,500 people.
Really?
And he built it, and he built it, and he built it. And I will sit there and say, between Oklahoma, who kind of came in a little bit later,
Mm-hmm.
the SEC boom is because of investment in the work of coaches to do that. But it was places like ESPN and some of the other smaller organizations realizing that there's something there. You just have to invest. Nebraska volleyball has an outdoor volleyball match last year, and they have 100,000 people there.
I saw that.
You just have to have the vision and the desire and the bravery to do it. I was at Texas A&M, and we have 2,500 season ticket holders. We were doing a game every year that had between 5,000 and 8,000 people, and that's because G. Guerreri just grew it. And that was how, by getting all of that, that was how his program got bigger. But he was bringing teams in to get to experience that, and it sort of drives it. And he's involved with the NCAA right now. We got to have drivers, and we got to have people that are brave enough to, and we have to have visionaries that are okay with, we don't have to be tied to the men's game. We need to have a championship that is celebrated. We need to be seen. We need to have some marquee matchups. And it's tough for the college game because there's going to be a lot of club players that never make it to us because they get snatched up and go pro, which is great. And how do you share those stories? How do you continue to share those stories? Because it'll still create pathways. We can't just do it on World Cup years.
Yes. What advice would you give as a D1 coach to the parents of a daughter whose dream is to play for a D1 coach such as yourself? What advice do you give the mother and the father?
The biggest one, and I know this is the way you worded it, and I don't think it's a bad thing, but this is how I tell everyone.
Mm-hmm.
You don't put yourself in a box. So I happen to go to 2 state schools, but I've spent a large chunk of my career working for small private schools. There is a fit for everybody. If you get tied up in labels, especially with a lot of
I see
legislation,
what you're saying.
if you get caught into that, you're in trouble. And so a lot of it is the more you know, the better off you're going to be. The more educated you are about the process, the better off you're going to be. The easiest thing is I tell them to create a checklist that has nothing to do with soccer. What do you want your college experience to look like? Big classrooms, you're going to go to a state school. Small classrooms, teachers know you're going to go to a smaller one, maybe a private school. And then you can get into the cost, and then you can get into the soccer. But once you start to really look at all of those things, that's where you hit the where your fit is.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell people to make their pros and cons list and really think about what do they want out of their college experience. That's before you get to soccer, and then soccer comes off of that.
Let's talk, as we're getting ready to wrap up here, Coach, about diversity in soccer. Excuse me. How can we grow diversity in soccer? And by diversity, I mean African American girls, people of color, or women of color. How can we grow that dynamic in women's soccer?
Access. That also comes with how many young African American girls turn on TV and they see somebody that looks like themselves on there. That's a huge push.
Mm-hmm.
If you can see it, you can be it. And how often are we pushing that? And how often are we celebrating that?
Right.
And I think that's a big deal. There's not a lot of African American men or women in golf because access is so restricted and it's so quote unquote elitist. Well, I got to tell you, when I listen to some of these clubs and their costs and stuff, we're getting pretty damn close to elitist as well. Like we're pricing people out of the game, and we're not being an inclusive group, and that's a big deal. Like, are we creating access for everybody? And I don't think people can answer that question
That's a
honestly
great question.
and say yes, we're not. And that's why if you can see it, you can be it. We don't show it enough, but we price people out all the time, and it doesn't make any sense.
What do you think? And of course, the money is a huge issue. I agree with that because with club soccer, the price of it is extraordinary. And maybe that goes back to your point of there's so many more coaches that are full time now than just volunteering. So the price to play reflects that. And then, of course, you have the travel and the hotels and things like that. It makes it difficult for a lot of people to participate in club soccer and things like that. What do you think that colleges and clubs can do better to make the sport more diverse?
It's tough to answer that at the college level because personally, I think that there's going to be a college loan bubble that bursts in the next 10 to 20 years. Colleges can't keep spending money and getting loans and raising the cost of tuition, so they keep getting that. I mean, that's killer. But the other side of it is we need to be celebrating NAIA schools and JUCOs and take away the stigma of both of those. Stop this stigma of D2 and D3 programs being worse soccer than before. That's a big deal. That's why I kind of say don't paint yourself into a box with the Division I thing, because there's a lot of different places to play. But if I was a JUCO coach, and I'm friends with a lot of them, they have to fight that stigma all the time. And if you go watch some of those teams play and you go watch and look at their rosters, NAIA, JUCO, D2, those are some of the most diverse rosters in the country because they have access and because they provide the opportunity and they provide a price point that allows kids to get in. D3s, on the other hand, for a lot of them that aren't state schools, we price that out of the game. Like, it's a good degree, but it's not worth 90 grand. Like, give me a break here. You're paying for the name. And I think that that's a big deal. I think that as a country, we have to stop this stigma of this means everything or this is bad. You can get an associate's from your JUCO, knock out 2 years and have something to fall back on, and then have 2 years of college film. And it doesn't matter what sport that is. But we got to take away that stigma, because that opens up a ton of easier access. And then that creates another platform to jump off to. And so we have to do that with the NAIA level and the D2 level. We have to, as a culture, D1 seems to be this end all be all, but I was at A&M and I went to Lamar. Lamar has a ton. I have 1/3000th of the budget that A&M had as a soccer program at Lamar. That's unreal. Though we're not operating in the same tier
at all.
But on August 17th, I still got to roll the ball out and coach at Texas A&M. And so that's why it's, when you start looking at it, what do you want your experience to be? Don't shut the door on some of these places that actually do have access. And then that access allows another bigger pathway from the club level into the college level. That's something that I try to teach to a lot of people is JUCO gets a bad rap, and I don't know why, because a lot of money gets spent on 4-year schools paying for electives. And you know what you do at a JUCO? You knock out those electives at a really low cost.
Yes.
And you get that important sheet of paper that can open up doors and give you film. And I don't understand it. It's just, I think it's an elitist mentality. It blows my mind.
I am shocked by your answer, Coach. Because that's why I phrased the question like that, specifically with the D1 component in there. I'm shocked by your answer, but it makes so much sense.
I thought about it.
Yeah. I can tell. I can absolutely tell. Okay, so coach, as we get ready to say goodbye, what would be your elevator pitch, if you will, to get more girls involved in soccer, whether that's at the club level, the collegiate level, the national level? What is your elevator pitch to get more girls interested in wanting to play the sport?
Soccer changed my life and I've been involved in this sport for almost 35 years now. It is the one sport that the ball never stops moving. You never stop moving. It is a true team sport. It is a nonstop sport. Um, it involves a skill set that a lot of other sports don't, because hand foot or eye foot coordination is totally different than hand eye coordination. It is a graceful yet physical sport. It is one of those where it is the test of ultimate teamwork because of how many people have to be involved to be successful. It gave me the best friends I've had in my entire life. It opened up more doors for me than anything I've ever played. And I did a lot of sports growing up. It is to me, there's a reason that it's not played as much in this country, but there is a direct reason that it is the sport that is played all around the world, and it's the most popular sport. And it's one of the few sports that you don't actually have to speak the same language as the person you're playing next to in order to be successful, because the game just talks itself. So that one, they put me on the spot with that one, but there's some personal and there's some professional in there.
Hey, you handled it and you answered it very well. Very well. Thank you so much, coach, for being on the podcast. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. To my community, thank you so much for tuning in and watching. You can get Coach Nathan's podcast on YouTube Podcasts and Apple Podcasts. And remember, you always have time to listen and learn on the go.